Isn't it funny how our biggest wins, our greatest successes, can somehow plant the seeds for our worst failures? It's a strange paradox, but we see it all the time. Today, we're going to dig into a powerful story about that very thing. What happens when pride takes over?
All right, so let's jump right into the Bible to Second Chronicles chapter 12, verse 12. This verse is really our anchor for this whole conversation. It draws this incredibly sharp line between total destruction on one side and mercy on the other. And what's the deciding factor? It all hinges on one single action: humbling oneself. That's the core idea we're about to unpack.
So this leads to a really big question, and I want you to kind of keep this in the back of your mind as we go. How on earth can our greatest strengths, our successes, our accomplishments, the things that make us feel secure, how can those very things become the reason we fall apart? It sounds crazy, right? Well, let's find out. And to answer that question, we're going to look at the life of a king, a man named Rehoboam. His story is, well, it's a perfect illustration of how you can go from strength straight into a stumble. Okay, so check this out. This timeline lays out the cause and effect so clearly. First, Rehoboam gets his kingdom established, everything is strong, he's secure, life is good. But, and this is the critical part, it's right there, at that peak, that pride starts to take root. He and his people just kind of decide they don't need God's laws anymore. So what happens next? Bam! An invasion. King Shishak of Egypt comes knocking and everything is about to collapse. But then you get this turning point. Faced with total disaster, Rehoboam and his leaders finally get it. They humble themselves. And because of that one act, God shows them mercy and pulls them back from the edge. But let's be super clear here. Mercy didn't mean there were no consequences. And this is such a key point. Yeah, they were spared from being completely wiped out, but their kingdom took a massive hit. They lost treasures, their defenses were weakened, and that sense of peace and security, it was shattered. The scars of their pride were definitely still there. So this next part is all about digging into that destructive force. We're going to talk about the real price of pride and how it causes us to drift away from our foundation. So what are we really talking about when we say pride? It's not always this big, loud, arrogant thing. A lot of the time, it's just that quiet little thought in the back of your head. I've got this. That's all it takes. It's a subtle shift toward relying on yourself, and step by step, it leads you away from the protection and peace you get from depending on God. So why is this such a big deal? Well, ironically, it's when things are going great that we're most likely to forget God. We start giving all the credit to our own strength, our own hard work. And this begins a slow drift away from our real source of security. And almost without even noticing, that inner peace we had just starts to fade away. Pride isn't a sudden explosion, it's more like a quiet corrosion. But the good news is, the story doesn't have to end in destruction. Now, let's talk about the solution. Let's talk about the power of humility, the path that leads back to getting things right. I mean, just look at this contrast. It puts it side by side, black and white. Pride leads to a break with God. It ends in loss and destruction. Why? Because it's all about relying on yourself. Humility, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. It invites God's mercy. It leads to restoration. And it's all about depending on God. We're talking about two totally different ways of approaching life. And the results of choosing humility, it's unbelievably powerful. The Bible says God is quick to forgive a humble heart. Even after a colossal failure like Rehoboam's, humility opens the door for things to be restored. It's the key that literally turns God's anger into mercy, all because it starts with acknowledging a simple truth. I need help. Okay, so we've looked at the history, we get the concepts, but how do we actually apply this to our lives? Right now. This next part is all about that, 4 really practical ways to cultivate humility in our day-to-day lives. Let's just walk through these. First, stay prayerful, especially when you're successful. Don't be like Rehoboam and wait for a crisis to start talking to God. Second, always acknowledge the source. Remember that every good thing you have is a gift, not just something you earned. 3, be quick to admit your mistakes. When you realize you've drifted off course, just be honest about it. And finally, number 4, learn to accept correction. When someone gives you feedback, listen with a soft heart instead of jumping to make excuses. This is what humility looks like in action. So we've covered a lot of ground, from an ancient king's big mistake to some very practical steps for us today. Let's bring it all home with one final core takeaway. If you remember only one thing from our time together, let it be this: stay humble. Why? Because pride will always eventually break you. But humility,
Humility has the power to restore you, no matter how far you've fallen. And that is the simple, profound lesson from the story of King Rehoboam.